later. So yeah, so we will be recording this just so everyone is aware, and very excited to have our interns, our summer interns with us. We a little slow over the summer with vacations and everyone listening to the news about what the CDC will allow or not allow, or you know, it seems like we're kind of in an interlude between what do we do and what can we do. But normal summer doldrum, I guess, between July and August. So we took a little time off, but coming back to point out some great work that our interns have done for us this summer. And for some of them, we'll be continuing to do for a few more weeks, but others will be preparing for going back to in-person, in-class UVA. So that should be exciting. I think Ineke has not even experienced that yet, so this will be her first time, so that'll be good. Looks like we've hit the noon mark here, so as we let some more people log in, I'd like to welcome everyone to leave any comments in the Zoom chat or in Facebook comments, or you can email us at programs@albemarlehistory.org. Send us any questions you would like to try to address during the show. You can also send us suggestions for any future shows. So we're here for you in the community. So if you have ideas for a program that you'd like to see, and hopefully we might be able to get back into in-person programming here too. So if you have any ideas, please email us at programs@albemarlehistory.org. A few announcements before we get started. We had a jam-packed June programming schedule with our Civilpedia report for our last program, which was in the first week in June. And then that was followed up by our genealogist extraordinaire, Shelley Murphy, who's on our board, and our fabulous research librarian, Miranda Burnett, who I believe is the interested listener in our panel today. They had their last Ask a Genealogist of the season on June 8th. It was a great program that we're partnering with JMRL on. For our speaker series, we had Sam Towler on the history of Foxfield with special guest Kelsey Cox, who is the new executive director for Foxfield Races. We had that on June 15th, and we're hoping to have something coming up here soon to help promote Foxfield Races in the fall. And we wrapped up our June schedule on the 29th with our special program, The Independence of Poe, with Chris Sempner from the Poe Museum in Richmond. And hope you were able to catch all of these in June, but if not, you can find all of our recordings on our YouTube channel, and some of them also on Facebook in our videos. So for most of July, we took a little summer hiatus, so you didn't miss any programs, but with August almost here and back to school season, we wanted to take this opportunity to point the spotlight on our great summer interns. So I'm looking forward to this program today. A couple other announcements. Our walking tours are very popular even in the heat of summer. So we can find lots of shady spots on the tour, so we can kind of walk from one shady spot to another, and you can learn some local history. So email us at programs@albemarlehistory.org to book your tour. With COVID, we've not been able to pull together the work needed for our Well-Like Spirit Walk, which we usually hold in the fall, but we will be offering some additional themed tours this fall and winter, so stay tuned for those offerings. The Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society and the Jefferson Madison Regional Library partnered on putting together some exhibits commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the public library system in Charlottesville. And the 100-year anniversary of the building that we are in, the old public library, the McIntyre building. The exhibits have been installed on the 3rd floor of JMRL Central Branch, and the library is now open to the public. So come by and visit. We're working on it with JMRL for plans on an opening reception for that exhibit, and also a film premiere by Lorenzo Dickerson, which will be held at the Paramount And that film documents the history of the library also. So stay tuned for some program announcements. We'll have a program in August, probably late August, and then we know the film premiere will be in October, I believe, October 21st, and we'll be sending out information for that. And we will also soon be opening our doors to the public and getting back to some sort of normalcy. With vaccinations on the rise and Albemarle County and the city of Charlottesville doing pretty well, but you know, you got to keep an eye on the news. But we think it's time for us to get back to business as usual. So stay posted, and we'll basically be unlocking our doors and opening ourselves to the public. So looking forward to that. So enough with the announcements. Let's make some history, Sterling. The meandering is all yours.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Sterling Howell here with Tom Chapman of the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. And we'd like to welcome you to Unregulated Historical Meanderings, the Get 'em Hooked While They're Young edition. This is our 8th unregulated, unstructured live show in which we invite some person or persons to join us and have a casual conversation about things of interest to our friends here in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area and beyond. Today, we're very proud to have 4 wonderful young ladies who are working as interns for the Historical Society this summer on some very interesting projects. So let's introduce them now. Madison Wilson, a longtime Albemarle County local, is earning a master's degree in urban and environmental planning at UVA's School of Architecture with a certificate in historical preservation. Madison is currently working with the Historical Society on the Penn Park project. She is writing an article about the rediscovered, unmarked burials for enslaved persons in the park, slated to be published in the magazine of Albemarle Charlottesville History in 2022. And she's also helping to organize research to help find possible living descendants of this community of the dead. Madison's internship is in partnership with the city of Charlottesville and supported with the funding from the city's Historic Preservation and Planning Department. So thank them as well. We also have Ineke La Fleur, who's a second-year student studying humanities at the University of Virginia. She is a longtime resident of Charlottesville and Albemarle County and worked with UVA's Carter G. Woodson Institute and Monticello's Getting Word Oral History Project, all before coming to the Historical Society. This summer, Ineke is contributing to the Society's digital projects focused on Civilpedia.org. Ineke comes to us through the Institute for Public History at UVA, and her internship is generously supported by the Nowell Center for Civil War History. Next, we have Kelly Kogan. She is a rising 4th-year student studying sociology and Spanish in the College of Arts and Sciences at UVA. Kelly is involved with the Visas program, College Mentors for Kids, and Madison House. Some of her interests include law, immigration, and writing. This summer, Kelly has been working as a research intern for the Historical Society project on race and sports. You'll be learning more about that later. Kelly came to us through the UVA Career Center's Who's Internship Accelerator with funding generously provided through UVA. And last but not least, we have Annie Valentine. She's also working on the Society's Race and Sports project this summer. She graduated from the UVA this spring with a BA in History Distinguished Majors program. While at UVA, she enjoyed working with the Nowell Civil War Center and putting together student, faculty, alumni chats and coordinating scholarships through the Raven Society. She is hoping to pursue graduate studies in history and social work. And Annie's work this summer has been funded by private donations to the Historical Society, and we look to our community to support our continuing work on the Race and Sports project. Thank you all very much for joining us today. All right, where do we start? Let's start with Madison. Madison, you are working with the information collected in the Penn Park project. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that project is about?
Hello, everyone. My name is Madison. So the project itself is being headed by the Historic Preservation Department with Jeff Werner of the City of Charlottesville. And what we're hoping to do is simply just spread awareness for what has been found and confirmed at Penn Park, which is unmarked enslaved burials There are 3 marked cemeteries currently in Penn Park. If you walk past like the golf center, the house there, if you keep walking, you'll find these cemeteries that date back to the 1700s. And what they've been able to find is that the people in the oldest parts of the cemeteries owned slaves. And then what Jeff has found is the depressions in the earth indicate enslaved burials. So what we're trying to do is gain traction and attention towards this specific area as Charlottesville grapples with and tries to understand the history of slavery in the area.
All right, great. So you mentioned the depressions in the ground. How do you know the depression is an unmarked grave?
So typically, if all you're given when searching for unmarked graves, if the depressions follow a pattern, if there's several depressions in the earth, that's a first sign. The other sign is their orientation. Typically, they are oriented north to south. That's a classic way of a classic burial style. And so if there is a pattern there, that is something that you can further your research on and do something like GPR, which that's the technology that is used to confirm grave shafts. And that is ground penetrating radar. And it's a non-invasive way to show differences of soil disturbances and confirming those patterns with like certifiable grave shafts. And I want to say it almost works like sonar, but it's not technically sonar, but it's a radar that goes into the earth and just shows anomalies. Because the last thing we want to do is start out our research by digging up and disturbing these graves. So that's enough for us to understand that these are graves.
All right, so if you're pretty confident you found a grave, how do you know that the burial is for an enslaved person?
So enslaved burials are typically not marked or fenced off. We can also tell that these people due to the property records showing that the Gilmer and Craven families owned slaves and had servants. So what we can infer by the magnitude of the graves that have been found, which is around 40-ish, 43-ish, could mean that descendants or freed servants were also buried there. But that has to be more determined by genealogical research and funerary records. But usually there aren't funerary records of those that were enslaved. We have the descendants typically is where we can tell where people are buried if we can find that. But Penn Park is an interesting case where the enslaved are buried directly next to their owners. That isn't something that you see very often when researching unmarked enslaved burials. Usually they are on the forest line or deep in the forest around these estates, or far away from the owners' cemeteries themselves. So this is a very interesting case in particular. And something that Jeff Werner has pointed out is that on one of the headstones of one of the slave owners, I believe it's a Craven, it says kind father and like kind slave owner or something, kind master. So what we can infer is that there was this different sort of relationship maybe happening at the time that made it so they felt the need to bury their enslaved next to them. And in that way, at the time, maybe seen as kind. The other thing that we find interesting is that the entrance to the cemeteries themselves are on the south side. So if you enter it that way, or no, it's the west side, I believe. I have to look at it again. You have to enter it that way. And then with the entrance being there, the enslaved are buried on the back side. So it's almost like they're hidden as well. So there's all these like interesting details about this unmarked enslaved burial in particular that you don't see in other instances.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. So we've certainly all heard before slave masters being referred to as kind, and I think we all
Mhm.
also know that that's a contradiction in
Right.
terms.
Mhm.
So, do you have any other thoughts, insights about what might have been different here that uh, inspired people to bury these people in these two very different classes in such proximity to one another?
I don't know, that's something it's at this point, it's just discussion. The only reason why I mentioned it is because it is so odd to see the close proximity, and to have that physical marker right there that says they lauded themselves as good owners. Um, that's all I can speak on it right now, but it is definitely worth noting that there was a different mentality, of course, back then that we all know, like you just mentioned, but it is something that's worth looking into more. I would like to see if we can find letters or something of the sort kind of that expands on that, but I don't know if it even really matters. It is what it is. They owned people. That's, morally bankrupt, but it adds to the reason why they are next to each other. I guess I could say that.
Yeah, very interesting. I look forward to seeing what more comes up out of that.
Hmm.
And I guess getting to what does matter. What do you think? What does all this mean for the greater history of the area? What are we gonna take away from this research?
So the reason I'm personally interested in this is because I'm from the Albemarle area. I was raised here since I was really young. And throughout all my schooling here, public schooling, we didn't learn anything about everyday slavery. What we read about was Jefferson or presidents or like these very rich white men that had these. And so our relationship to our history of slavery was very detached because we figure, oh, well, that wasn't part of my family's history and that wasn't something that we did, right? As white people, especially in the area, it's this dissonance that we have with it and it doesn't feel close to home. But the reality is that these people were buried here and literally erased. Their whole lineage to a degree could have been erased because of not being marked down, whether it be physical markers or just records of where these people are. um, there is a humanism to this now that we didn't really have before. Is like, well, we can confirm that these bodies are here, that these people are here, and where are their descendants, and how have they been affected by not having this lineage clear to them of where they come from. So I think for Charlottesville and Albemarle, especially, who we as a local, I can say this, is we really tout ourselves as being this liberal, accepting place. We have to face facts, and the facts is we don't want to face this. We haven't wanted to face this. That these things happen right in our backyards, right in our neighborhoods that we live in today. Is all of this is right here in our backyards. It's not up on the hill in Monticello only. It's right here. So hopefully this can kind of fill in gaps for a lot of people, whether they be direct descendants or just people in the area that like to learn more about this. Um, we just really hope that this project kind of gains attention and interest for the greater community.
Absolutely. That's yeah. Thank you very much, Madison. It's really looking forward to your article. Anyone who would like to read it, you know what? A great way to do that is to become a member of the Historical Society, and you will get a copy of our next magazine of Albemarle Charlottesville history. All right. Thank you very much, Madison. Next, let's talk to Ineke. Ineke, you've been adding a lot of content to Civilpedia this summer. For those out there who missed our Civilpedia report edition, Ineke, can you tell us very briefly, just a little bit about what Civilpedia is and what you're doing with it?
Sure. So to put it very simply, Civilpedia is a local online encyclopedia that anyone can edit regardless of any technical skill or research experience. And so I've become an editor, and in addition to helping organize the site a little to make it more user-friendly, I'm researching and writing articles about the history of Charlottesville and Albemarle, focusing on the Civil War and stories that might not be as represented. So that mostly boils down to women and people of color. And I'm mostly focusing on that bit of diversity because of the recommendations of the Civilpedia report, which you just mentioned, that came out in June. 3 students from the Batten School at UVA published a report on how to make Civilpedia more user-friendly, some recommendations. So I'm spending my time here trying to help fulfill those, mostly filling in the history section.
Great, and we really appreciate it too. We definitely want Civilpedia to become the go-to place for local history in the area. But why the Civil War focus?
So as you said at the beginning, my internship has been sponsored by the Now Center for Civil War History at the university. So that's a center devoted to research of the Civil War and its effects on the area. And they've been working really hard the past few years on creating digital projects so more people can learn about more aspects of the Civil War. So not only is it something that they wanted me to do, it's something that I have a lot of great online resources for.
Great. And you already briefly mentioned the diversity focus. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, I did. So I think that something that's been confusing, especially in the past, let's say 5 or 10 years, is there's been this big push for more diverse stories in our local history, is that some people might think that we're trying to erase history, that we're trying to literally tear down the legacies of people like Jefferson or McIntyre, Paul McIntyre. And we're not doing that. We're just adding to the historical record. There isn't a finite amount of history. It's not like we're going to run out of space or anything. We're just adding more so people can have their voices represented, their stories told, and people in the present can learn about as much history as possible and get the clearest idea of how we got from wherever it is we might have started to where we are now.
Great, very well said, Ineke. I need you to come out on some of my tours sometime and say that. All right. Tell me, all right, so Civilpedia is already an open source platform. Anybody can get on, anybody can add to it, anybody can edit it. You mentioned accessibility earlier. How do you make an open source site more accessible?
Well, like I said, there's not a finite amount of history, and we're trying to tell as many people's stories as possible. And it's really hard for just a few people to tell everyone's stories, especially if they're not members of those groups, or even if it's something as simple as a neighborhood. If I'm writing about a neighborhood I've never been to, there are obviously some things I'm going to miss, maybe some interesting stories or names that mean more than to someone local than they might mean to me. So it's important that everyone can add to it. So Civilpedia can be as democratic a source of information as possible, as many perspectives can be represented as possible, and to just really enforce that our history and our community is for everyone.
Great. So are you enjoying this?
Can you tell? No, I'm lucky enough to have 2 more weeks here, and I could keep working here I could keep working on exactly the topic I'm doing for at least another year. There is just so much work to be done, and there are so many interesting stories I learn every day. So highly recommend sign up for Civilpedia.
And we have certainly appreciated having you, Ineke. So anything else you'd like to say about, I don't know, the value of this work or Civilpedia?
I feel like I've covered a lot of it already, but it's all about understanding and making as much information open to as many people as possible. You know, history's for everyone. Our community's supposed to be for everyone. And I've lived here a long time. I've lived here over a decade and most of my life. And every single day that I work here and I go on Civilpedia, I learn something new. And usually it's something that's like directly under my nose. One of the first articles I wrote for Civilpedia was about McKee Row, which was a mixed race row of shops and residences, like right next to Court Square. And that was torn down to expand the courthouse and to put up a statue of a Confederate general. And I never knew about that. I only knew about the statue. So that was just, every day you learn something, and it's just a wonderful experience.
Great. Well, keep right on learning then, Ineke. Okay, let's move on to Annie and Kelly. All right, you guys have been working as a team for us this summer, so I will let you tag team these. You approach it however you prefer. So Annie and or Kelly, please tell us about this race and sports project.
Yeah, so this summer, Annie and I have been working on the Race and Sports project, and the main goal of this project is to be able to collect and honor and share the oral histories of all of the individuals involved in the desegregation of local high school athletics in the area, both during and after the period of massive resistance in Virginia. So our aim is, by gathering these oral histories of around 50 to 60 individuals, that we can provide a more unique perspective on the period of desegregation that hasn't been covered as frequently, in the sense that we're focusing on desegregation through the lens of these local athletes and local actors and coaches that were all involved in athletics amidst the period of desegregation in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area.
So athletes and coaches, is that what you said? These are the folks we're going to be interviewing?
Yes, and students as well that were involved in these sports teams, and also that went to the main primary schools involved in desegregation.
So what do we hope to get out of this?
Well, in the short term, as immediately as we're able, we'd like to put all of this information into a website. We hope to have all the 50 to 60 interviews up available for the public and for scholars and interested students to be able to access and use to further develop their own research and their own work. And we also, in the process of all of our research, have come across a lot of newspaper clippings that are really interesting. And we've made a research timeline as well of all the big events, but also some of the smaller events taking place at each of the local schools and the things happening on the sports teams. And every now and then things happening in individual people's lives that made a big difference for a large number of people. So we also hope to put that timeline up on this website as well. So we're hoping that that will be maybe in the next year or so. And then in the longer term, we'd like to make some of these interviews into a documentary. And with a documentary, the space is more limited. So we'll only be able to take a handful of interviews and put them into the documentary. But we hope to have a sense of the story from having these many interviews. And when we put them together, we'll hopefully be able to have a really more specific narrative, but we'll hope to weave in threads from everyone that we talk to in this documentary as soon as we're able to do that.
Absolutely. And documentary, wow, that's a big project. We're gonna need some support for that. So anybody out there would be interested in supporting this, please get in touch with us. We could use your help. All right, Annie or Kelly, so desegregation has been written about a lot. What do you think we're gonna gain from looking at this through the lens of sports that hasn't been done before?
Well, when we've been reading through primary and secondary sources that are available, and specifically scholarly sources available on the topic, there have been some larger studies of sports in the United States and the effect of desegregation on sometimes larger sports teams and in some specific universities. But we haven't seen anything like that with our local area. There's not been a focus on sports here. And what we're so lucky to have is Burley High School had an amazing winning streak before the school closed. And then Lane High School had another amazing winning streak as well. And so we're thinking that because these teams were so well known in the communities who got so excited and rallied behind them during their winning streaks, and so the players were very well respected, and this was right about the time when desegregation was happening. We're really interested in seeing the effect of what these athletes went through and how they portrayed their triumphs and their struggles and how that affected the community around them. And we're thinking that this will be a really unique perspective on desegregation.
Yeah, it's going to be some very interesting stuff for sure. Can't wait till we get further along in the process. Will you two tell us a little bit about your respective roles in this project thus far?
Yeah, so this summer, Annie and I have been working as sort of co-researchers on the project, and we're working under a team of several different individuals, including UVA history professor George Gillum, as well as UVA Emerita professor Phyllis Leffler, as well as Sterling Howell and Tom Chapman of the Historical Society.
I don't know those guys.
Yeah, so in the first half of the summer, we really wanted to focus on conducting background research so that we could generate a better understanding of all of the key events surrounding both massive resistance and the general process and timeline of desegregation in the Albemarle Charlottesville area. And so in that research, we really focused on reading through lots of primary sources, such as articles from the Daily Progress, so that we could better gauge and understand how desegregation was even discussed and presented at the time, and also focusing on some secondary sources so that we could learn about the already existing literature and discussion on desegregation, as well as seeing where there were gaps that we could fill in with our own research.
And in the second half of the summer, we've been trying to identify individuals who might be able to help us find some of these diverse perspectives that we've started to come across in our research in primary and secondary sources. And so we've been looking for names and researching the individuals that we think might be helpful, and then beginning to reach out to those individuals. And we're looking to them to really frame and shape the story that we're eventually going to tell, because as we said a little bit a moment ago, the primary sources and secondary sources that we found really haven't focused on the athlete's story, and especially in our area. And so we're thinking that this will really be not a new story, because it has been around, but it's a story that hasn't really gotten out to the public yet, and to even to some scholars and interested students. And as we said before, the stories are all the more exciting, and their voices and experiences are all the more influential because of the remarkable winning streaks of some of the high school teams.
Great, yes. All right. What was something that surprised you while you were working on this?
I would say that the overall complexity of the desegregation process was not necessarily surprising, but I didn't realize the extent to which there were so many different layers and levels to everything, especially in meeting with some of the individuals that we researched that were students and that were alive during the desegregation in Charlottesville. It was interesting to see that it wasn't always as clear cut as you might think it would be, in terms of students transferring to previously all white schools from previously or predominantly Black schools, and the transition is really dependent on the student and their individual experiences. And it's interesting to see how sports played into even the transition between these athletes going from predominantly white schools or predominantly Black schools to predominantly white schools, and whether or not they were accepted and fully integrated into their sports teams. And that was just really interesting to hear everyone's stories and different outlooks and everything.
Annie, do you have anything else?
Well, building on what Kelly has just said, it's really, that surprising fact has really become a good challenge for us, because we've realized that we get to represent lots of different stories and perspectives, even in this specific topic of athletics and desegregation. And so, for example, we're looking at before and after Burley High School closed. When Lane High School started to integrate as early as '59, they started to have just a few trickles of interested Black students who truly wanted to be at Lane for many different reasons. And so they really only had started with very small numbers of students at Lane. And these students were largely committed to being there, although some were really unhappy and left and returned to Burley before it closed. But then starting in the school year of 67 to 68, when Burley had just closed, all of the Burley students from the city were forced to go to Lane, whether they wished to or not. So when we're thinking about choosing interviewees for this project, we're making sure, for example, that we get some Black and white students at Lane before Burley closed, and then some Black and white students at Lane after Burley closed, so we can kind of capture all of the dynamics and the social dynamics and what was hard and what worked and what went well, and also, of course, students who stayed at Burley all the way through and maybe graduated just before Burley closed, so that we can kind of get a sense of what perspectives were like and how that impacted sports teams. And definitely some individuals were welcomed on the Burley team and had fantastic runs because they felt that that was their school where they were really supported. And then yet some students who were, say, sophomores when Burley closed suddenly had to go to Lane and maybe weren't so welcome. And so there are so many different stories that we're interested in understanding here. And so I think that's been a big challenge and a surprise for us, maybe at least for Kelly and I a little bit, but also something that is going to be extremely meaningful in the long term to see if we can capture all of these different threads.
Yes, absolutely. Lots of different threads, lots of different factors. It's a very interesting project. So you were talking about challenges. Would you say that is the biggest challenge you faced? Was just the complexity of the issue, or have you come across other challenges that you think is unique to this particular project?
I think also just trying to capture as many perspectives and stories as possible, even though we are limited to the number of people that we can interview. Just making sure that we are providing as representative a story as possible, and that everyone's voice is heard, and that everyone has an opportunity to share all of their experiences.
How easy has it been to accomplish that thus far? Are you finding that people are very open to talk about those experiences?
Yeah, for the most part, I think that most of the people we've reached out to have been very generous and willing to talk. And a lot of times those people will end up recommending other people to us that we should reach out to. So it's been very helpful that most of the time people are really eager to talk and wanting to share their stories, and also wanting to help us connect to other people in the community.
Yeah. What about memories? 1950s was a long time ago. How are people's recollections?
Well, it seems to be coming back to some people in bits and pieces, but some of the other members of our team have excellent interviewing strategies of figuring out how we can capture people's stories in their entirety without maybe asking such specific questions. Because, for example, Dr. Gillum, who's part of our team, has a strategy of thinking that if we can get someone to start talking about a story that they're passionate about, we'll suddenly learn all these additional facts that we maybe are especially interested in, but they will likely have a sharper memory if they start talking about their favorite story or their favorite memory or something. And that's a good way for us to hopefully get a more accurate, but also a more full perspective of how they experienced whatever it is that we're interested in as well. So we're trying a lot of different kinds of questions in order to really authentically and as best as we can really tap into those memories.
That's great. What has been the most rewarding part of your internships?
I think being able to just learn and listen and help capture everyone's stories for me has been one of the most rewarding parts of this internship experience, because now after we've done some of the background research and now that we feel like we have a good sense of everything that took place from our primary and secondary source research, it's really interesting to be able to then even meet some of the individuals that we've researched and to hear them speak on things, because they really are able to illuminate and illustrate everything that happened in a way that you can't always capture by just reading something.
And building on what Kelly has said, it's exciting to think that we're hopefully giving them a platform to speak and share in a way that they haven't been able to do before. And that feels really meaningful, that they'll have a space to share their voices. And then also that future generations and even scholars and interested students and members of the community today will be able to really hear these stories that they may not have been able to otherwise hear, and that those stories will hopefully shape other scholars' work and just any of our lives today, that they can help inform us on what things were like, and perhaps on what we can be doing in our own times today. And it's also been a gift to learn from those voices, but also just to learn from all the other scholars on our project team. We've had so many diverse ideas because this is a challenging topic. So lots of different people on our team have had diverse ideas of how we can tackle this and how we can really give a fair representation and a true opportunity to each and every individual that we come across to really contribute to this project. And it's exciting to be on a team strategizing with a lot of other experts on how we can really bring this to light and how we can do it in a really inclusive, thoughtful, and sophisticated way.
Excellent. And yes, thank you both so much. It's been a pleasure having you around. Thank you so much for all your help helping us get this project off the ground. But Madison and Ineke, I've left you hiding in the background for too long. I want to turn these last two questions that I asked Kelly and Annie back on you two. Madison and Ineke, can you tell me what has most surprised you in the work you've done on your project? What has been the most challenging, and what was the most rewarding?
I would say, I guess the most surprising is just how expansive the research has already been. Dr. Shelley Murphy is the same genealogist who worked on the memorial to enslaved laborers, and her connections and her expertise and her ability to reach people all over the country to have their input on this specific project and other projects that she has all of her hands in is like super impressive. And I think it's hopeful to see how many people are invested in projects like this all over and want to see them thrive. I think the biggest challenge for me has been, I think just like getting everything together. Honestly, the article portion of this has been what's been tough on me, because I'm reading so much information, then we're getting a lot of new information every day in these emails that I have with these genealogists. And so it's just, I'm meeting with Sam Towler soon, and we're going to kind of like go over it in person so I can have like a better idea of how he wants me to represent this research, because I am honestly not doing the bulk of the work that these people have been doing for a long time already. So I'm just somebody who's going to try to make it pretty and decipherable for the average Joe. So that's my biggest challenge. And then the most rewarding aspect, I guess, is similar to what's surprising me, is that I just feel like this is something that, while it's not the beginning of this research, I think it's something that more and more people are finding interesting, and hopefully just the legacy continues in this research.
Thank you.
I think I'd say the most surprising thing about the work I've been doing this summer is honestly just how much of it there is. I said I could work on this for a year and still have things to do. And that feels really true, because every time I write an article or I do research, I find 3 more things that I could just as easily spend an hour researching and writing about. The work is never ending. There's always more to say. So I've been trying to limit it to things that people haven't already said on Civilpedia and on sources like Wikipedia. So that's been a bit of a challenge too, choosing my battles, if you will. especially because I'm writing about the Civil War and its legacy in Charlottesville, which continues into the present. So there's a lot of content to cover. And I think that's something that's been another challenge, that I know that there are people out there and people in our community who hear like, oh, I'm writing about the Civil War, and think I'm writing about like Rio Hill and Earlysville and Waynesboro, like the battles and the generals. And instead I'm writing much more about the people, and the people on, not on the front lines or commanding the war. It's about like life during that and life after that, and how do we live with the legacy of this war. And there are people who aren't too happy I'm writing about that either. But the most rewarding thing has, like Annie said, I've been able to write about people and stories that have at times like been actively erased from the historical record. And I'm at least finding enough information to put that out there on a big accessible platform and say at least that they've been erased, and try and find something to say about them so people know they were there.
Thank you. All right. Okay, a question to all of you. Would you recommend that other young people like yourselves work for the Historical Society? Not all at once.
Yes. Yeah, it's a really, it's an, for me, I feel like it was an untapped resource. That was, so I went to Renaissance School, which is right down the street from the Historic Society, and we never once stepped foot in it. So my personal goal is hopefully by the end of the summer, I can contact them and say that we can host them and have a little interaction between that high school just down the road. So I'm hoping there will be more interaction there.
Great.
Yeah, it's been rewarding. I highly recommend it. I'm a big believer that young people should learn about history. So I'm a young people and I'm learning about history, and it's great. Highly recommend.
Great, thank you. Kelly or Annie, have anything to add?
Well, it's also a gift because having been at the university and been in this community for at least 4 years now, I still felt like I wasn't fully plugged in. And being here this summer has been really meaningful. Being able to meet a lot of people and also learn about a lot more of what's going on in the community, and be in the downtown area and understand how people are interacting with history in a different center rather than just at UVA and in that area, understanding the other kinds of historical projects and conversations that are going on in the Charlottesville area, because there are so many of them. And the more that we can all put our heads together and work together, the more interesting and meaningful and complex it all gets. So it's really a gift for university students to be able to be connected in with this so that they can have a sense of the larger picture of what's going on.
Yeah, to reiterate what Annie said so beautifully, I just have really appreciated, and I'm very grateful to have been able to learn about this community and the Albemarle community that I had not really ever been exposed to in my classes so far at UVA. And I'm just really gaining a new perspective on everything that I learned in my research here. And I would definitely recommend that other people intern at the Historical Society. And I've also gained a lot of useful research skills that I know that I'll be able to use in anything that I end up doing.
Awesome. Well, everyone, you heard it here. The Historical Society is a great place to work. So hopefully we plan to have some more internships in the future, and we are always looking for volunteer help. So if you would like to come and help us out, learn some things about the local community, about local history, please get in touch with me. I'm Sterling. My email is programs@albemarlehistory.org. Okay, that is pretty much all we have. Thank you so much, Ineke, Kelly, Madison, Annie. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your perspectives. Tom, are there any questions out there in the cyberspace that we can try to answer?
Unmute. Here I am. No, I haven't seen. There's a few. Dee Dee Smith out there loved the discussion about how to solicit memories without asking direct questions that Kelly was talking about. She loves that idea. And then another question about the challenges faced with the project, but I think you all have kind of covered that pretty well. There's I just, with Madison's work, she worked with Jeff Werner, who's the historic preservation and planning officer with the city. She'd worked with him as a previous intern, and Jeff brought Maddie to our attention, and she's been a great asset for us. But as she said, with the challenges, I mean, it is a challenge in terms of looking into the descendant research, but it's also very rewarding. What the county and what the city have already done or in the process of doing in terms of reaching out to these descendant communities to understand things such as the slave block down in Court Square. And I think Penn Park is a perfect opportunity there too. But it's also building upon a lot of work that's been done by the Central Virginia history researchers. She mentioned Sam Towler, who's a member of our board, but he is an amazing research person who has been inundating us with emails almost every day. I'm glad he took a vacation. He actually went to the beach, and I guess he doesn't have internet access, and I'm kind of happy because it was just constant boom, boom, boom. And it's great stuff. You can agree with me, Madison, on that, right?
It's good stuff, and he's very thorough, and I'm happy he puts all of his thoughts into PowerPoints and everything. So all of his emails are backed up with these clean PowerPoints that I can go look at later. But yes, it is a lot.
Mm-hmm. And the beauty of it with what Sam's doing is that it's really building upon a body of work that's been really over the past couple decades, kind of with Cinder Stanton through Monticello, Bob Vernon, Sam Towler, other members of CVHR have been putting a lot of the nuts and bolts of these property records and deeds and all this information. And now it's just trying to connect the dots and go beyond that, what the genealogy brick wall of, slavery does to African-American Black folks who are trying to understand their descent. There's usually that block, but we've already made some interesting connections that are leading us to believe that we know descendants who are in the local community, descendants of the people who are buried here at Penn Park. So it's a very, very cool. With Ineke, I loved you're talking about erasing history and living with the legacy of this war and what you've been working on there. I think that's an important thing for our community now, even more so to really understand, is that we are not erasing history, we're adding to it. We're bringing to light stories that were just not told or forgotten, or as you said, erased, and they did not fit the narrative of the past. So I think Civilpedia gives us that opportunity, and I will have to admit with Ineke that bringing her on as a younger UVA student, I kind of had the hope that she might stick around with us if volunteer capacity or even a paid capacity if we can find the funds moving forward, because she's been a great asset. A question did pop in here from Genevieve, and I guess this is looking at the race in sports. She says, I wonder if any women were interviewed for the athletic desegregation experience. There were a few opportunities for female students here in the Cville in that era. We have women on our list to talk to with the race in sports?
Yes, we do. We have some cheerleaders and we have women students who weren't able to be part of the athletic teams or chose when they came over from Burley, if they were Black students, that they thought that they didn't feel welcome or invited to really be on athletic teams. And we're also looking at women's basketball and women's tennis too. We're actually just getting started as official teams during the same period of desegregation. So we're hoping to interview some of those people that joined those initial teams as well.
Anything to add to that, Kelly, or Annie covered it?
Yeah, she covered it pretty well. Just that to add, I guess that also was another challenge, but we're trying to incorporate as many women athletes as possible, but we are limited in the sense that there just aren't as many. But we're doing our best to incorporate as many athletes and perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ken puts out there girls field hockey. So yeah, it definitely was field hockey was a sport on the women's side at that point. And as Phyllis points out in the chat here in Zoom that, we're just getting this project off the ground. So, but the work that Kelly and Annie have done have really built a great foundation for this project with their research. And then as we're able to start interviewing folks, that'll hopefully lead down multiple rabbit holes and tangents in terms of how we get connected with other people who these folks we interview know. So yeah, and I wanted to point out what one thing Kelly said, the point of the project of being to collect, honor, and share. I thought that was very well said. Thank you. Collect, honor, and share. I love that. So I don't see any more. Well, here's one question that popped up. For any panelist who wishes to answer, what is something from your experience with local history that you think your classmates should know about? Any takers?
I'll take it. So I mentioned earlier, I touched on the changing landscape of Charlottesville. And like Annie and Kelly said, it can kind of be not quite isolating at UVA, but you are in like your little bubble that's a little bit separated from Charlottesville. And I think knowing as a UVA student, whether you're a history student or interested or not, that the place you are in has not always been the way you see it now. I think that's something that's really interesting and important to know where you came from and how you got here.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah, a bunch of folks thanking you for all your hard work for the community. Thanks for the thoughtfulness and care in which you've approached these stories. Yeah, completely agree with that. I always enjoy having interns in my time in museums and the nonprofit world because, it helps me, figure out the priorities, figure out what's important about the work that we do, the work that I'm trying to do here at the Historical Society. And sometimes in many cases, and particularly in this day and age and with everything going on in the world around us, you can see the glass is half full and you kind of take a pessimistic approach sometimes. But seeing these young ladies and the work that they've done, the intelligence they have, it just makes me very optimistic for our future. So it always, I don't know, I enjoy. It's a lot of work having interns, keeping them all in line. Yeah, right. These guys keep themselves in line. They all do very great work. But at the same time, it's just for me, it's just been great having you all. And it really gives me a sense of pride about, what our younger generation is doing and trying to understand about the world around them and making a difference. So I don't see any more questions that have come in. You have anything on your side, Sterling, or?
No, not seeing anything else. I think we're about ready to roll.
Okay. Well,
we've taken up about an hour of your lunchtime. Thank you very much for joining us. Madison, Ineke, Kelly, and Annie, this has been great. Let me try to find my words here. I think that's about enough meandering for today. But before we go, we invite you to bring us any suggestions about where do we meander from here. Send us your ideas for future guests or future topics. Whatever you've got, leave it in our comments or email us at programs@Albemarle History. I want to reiterate our thanks for our intern funding partners again, the City of Charlottesville, Historic Preservation and Planning Office, and Jeff Warner specifically, the Institute for Public History at UVA with Lisa Goff, the NOS Center for Civil War History, the UVA Career Center, WHO's Internship Accelerator, and all of our other generous donors. Remember, everything we do as your historical society is because of your support. If you've not joined us as a member, please consider doing so. Annual membership of $45 is a fairly small amount to get all the different programs that we provide, and free access to those programs, research facilities, our annual magazine. So if you please consider supporting us and the work that we do for local history. You can join on our website, or you can give us a call, 434-296-1492. So Unregulated Historical Meanderings is brought to you by the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society and wonderful supporters like you. Thanks again to Madison, Ineke, Kelly, and Annie for Zooming with us today. Thanks to everyone out there for joining and supporting what we do. I'm Tom Chapman, here with Sterling Howe, asking the hard questions. And we hope to see you for our next Unregulated Historical Meanderings. So until then, meander on. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.